I'm recording now. All right, so we finally are talking about a little upkeep of housekeeping. If you'll go back 2 slides, Larry. Actually, go back one more and we can just see that we said our sponsors. Thank you to our sponsors. And now go forward and I'll finish the housekeeping. One of the things just to know, if you do need to pop off at any point, we are recording this finally, and we will post this so that you can finish watching the rest of our community meeting. And if you need to ask questions, like Ellie said a bit ago, use the chat, but make it a group chat or specifically to Ellie Habib so that she can collect questions or thoughts. All right. So what's the purpose? So the Food and Drug Administration, this is our chance, this meeting that we are going to have in October is our chance to educate we keep sliding around, to educate the FDA on what it's like to live with LGSOC. It allows us as patients to tell them how our life's been impacted, how you're individually currently managing with LGSOC. All of us are doing something different depending on where you are. And we're going to discuss, and this is a really important piece, is what a meaningful treatment would look like for you. Big question. It's going to take some thoughts. So why do I encourage every single person, every one of you here, encourage other people to participate? Is it's an opportunity for you to be heard. You will have an opportunity at our meeting to be heard. If you don't feel like calling in and talking, then you have the opportunity to write in and send in comments from you the whole time during the meeting. So why else should you participate? Well, the FDA approves all treatments for LGSOC, and they need to know what's important to the patient, what's important to us. And this knowledge will help impact their decision-making and lead to better treatments for us and potentially faster approvals. Big thing right there for LGSOC treatments. So why now? The patient's voice has historically been absent from the drug development process. And until a drug was approved by the FDA, sometimes to treat symptoms not important to the patients, or a clinical trial was failing and the drug company or FDA wanted to input from actual patients to understand the problem. And so that's when, it was asked, like, how's it going? But why now? We want your voice to be heard at the beginning of a process. And we are inviting industry to join us so that they can also hear. And again, this is recorded. So people developing treatments can read what's important to the patients before they begin their development and as they're dealing with side effects. And then also making it a stakeholder engagement and FDA priority. So an initiated PFDD, the program was to learn about the disease's impact on patients' lives, both from patients and their caregivers. So this is really an incredibly important opportunity for us to jump in, because as all of you know, there is not an FDA-approved drug just for us. Doesn't exist. So doing it now is we are heard at the beginning, and we hope that by doing this, that we're at the beginning of a process for any new drug development. All right, so then pop forward. All right, so now I would like to stop me, but I want to introduce y'all to Larry. Larry Bauer is here with us, and he works at Hyman, Phelps, and McNamara. And we have gotten to know Larry over the past several months as he's been helping us plan this meeting. Larry worked for the NIH for 17 years in clinical research, followed by a position at the FDA as a regulatory scientist in the Center for Drug Evaluation and Research's Rare Disease Program. Perfect for us. And it was a group he co-founded and worked for 10 years where he advanced rare disease drug development. We are so happy to have you, Larry. In private practice now, Larry has worked with many patient organizations to ensure their community's voices were heard by decision makers, like what he's doing for us. Relevant to our meeting, Larry's been involved in helping plan and moderate 3/4 of over 76 externally led PFDD meetings. So we're in good hands with Larry, and we appreciate Larry taking the time to be with us here today. So Larry, it's your turn.
Thank you so much, Nicole. It's really a great pleasure to be here tonight with all of you. Thank you so much for everybody taking the time out from your busy schedules and lives. But the purpose of tonight is to help orient you to this upcoming meeting that's happening just a little over a month from now. So just to give you an overview of what we'll talk about today, I'd like to give you a little bit of a background on the FDA and the process of drug development, just as kind of some foundational knowledge to help understand what the FDA does and how they do it. Then I'll give you an introduction to patient-focused drug development and talk about the role of the patient voice in drug development. Then we'll really get into the weeds and talk about the overview of this specific externally led patient-focused drug development meeting. And we'll give you some guidance about how you, every single one of you, can participate in the meeting. I wanted to apologize for the jumping around. I have this arrow. My cursor was kind of kept hitting the arrow, and I hope it'll be better under control now. So, okay, so this is the background on FDA and drug development. So, you know, there's a process called drug discovery. So for any disease, when they want to develop a new treatment, researchers try to discover a new drug through developing insights into the disease process that lets researchers know how to design a product to either stop or reverse the effects of the disease. There's many tests of molecular compounds to find possible beneficial effects against any of a large number of diseases. You know, they test many, many compounds to see how they work and how they might impact the course of the disease. Sometimes they look at existing treatments that maybe have unanticipated effects. So maybe a drug was developed for one purpose, and maybe, you know, it has this other effect that could be beneficial for a different disease. They also investigate new technologies, such as those that provide new ways to target medical products to specific sites within the body or to manipulate genetic material. So any kind of gene therapy or gene editing where they actually change something in the genes. And once researchers, after they screen all these products, they identify a promising compound, then the development of drugs follows a very well-established pathway to make sure of two things. They want to make sure the drug's safe, so that, you know, it's not going to harm anyone, and that it's effective so that when it reaches the public, it's actually, you know, being prescribed and can do what it said it was going to do. So the first step, on the bottom of your screen, you see these arrows moving from left to right. I'm going to go through each of these phases. This is the standard drug development pathway. And so on the far left, we see preclinical. So this is just like it sounds. It's before a drug goes into the clinic. So before reaching any human beings, they have to do testing on the new product. The primary goals at this early stage are to determine whether the product is reasonably safe for initial use in humans. We don't actually know that till we give it to a human being, but they have ways of testing it. And we also want to know that it's going to be sufficiently effective against the disease target in chemical assay tests or animal models. So sometimes they do give it to animals before giving it to a human to see how they react. And the end result of this preclinical stage of development is something called an IND, an investigational new drug application. This is when a company has tested, done all this preclinical work. They know how to purify the substance, how to make it consistently in the same way, and they put all this together into a package and they send it to the FDA in something called an IND. And the purpose of the IND is for the FDA to review all this preclinical work to see if they're going to allow the drug to move forward into human beings. Once the FDA gives the go-ahead, well, they have something called phase 1. This is the IND submission is reviewed for the pharmacology and toxicology studies. FDA looks at the manufacturing information to make sure that the drug is pure. They also review what is the clinical protocol and information about the investigator information. So the company has to come up with a trial design. What are we going to, how are we going to study this in human beings? And the goals for this phase 1 are they put a lot of emphasis on the drug safety. They determine the most common side effects of a drug, and they determine how the drug is metabolized in your body and then excreted. So once you take the pill, whether it's by mouth, IV, an injection, however it's administered, they want to know what happens to that drug in your body until it's excreted from the body. So, like I said, all this work in phase 1, sometimes it's done with healthy volunteers. So they don't even start with people with the disease. They give it to people who volunteer to be a healthy volunteer in the study. And sometimes they start out with very small numbers. They'll only give it to 1 or 2 people, see how they react, make sure there's nothing significant going on. And then they gradually increase the numbers. And then sometimes they give it to people with the actual disease. Once they have that data from phase 1, the clinical development moves into phase 2. The primary goal at this stage is to look at the drug's effectiveness. So how well does the drug work what it's intended, to do? They try to see if it works in people with a certain disease or condition. And oftentimes in phase 2, the drug is compared against placebo. Placebo sometimes we call sugar pill, but sometimes they divide the clinical study into 2 groups. One of the group gets the actual drug, the other group gets placebo. It's called a blinded study so that the patients don't know if they're getting the real drug or the placebo, and even the administering physician does not know if they're getting the drug or placebo. After and during this phase 2, they continue to monitor for short-term side effects and other safety issues, but they're also looking to see how well, is there any difference between those 2 groups? Do we see a greater effect in the people who actually received the drug versus the placebo? Sometimes when people think that they're getting the drug, they have something called a placebo effect, which is kind of a false positive effect that the drug's doing something. But when a drug actually works really well, those 2 groups separate out, and you see a big change in the people that got the drug compared to the people that got the placebo. Once we have this data from phase 2, we move into something called phase 3. The primary goals here are, this is a large-scale randomized placebo-controlled trial. In the phase 1 and 2 studies, we had smaller numbers, but now we want to give this to a large number of people. So the numbers go up from 10, 20, 30 people to maybe hundreds, or for some conditions like something for diabetes or blood pressure, it could even be thousands of people are given the drug in the phase 3 part of the trial. During this phase, they continue to look at the effectiveness to collect data about how well the drug is working. How long does what is the duration of the effect? So is it sustained, which gives information about how often you have to give another dose of the drug. They want to know if it's different in different populations. So are there any differences between people of different age groups, their response to it? People, maybe gender differences. And then sometimes it's also within a disease, sometimes there's, several different genetic variability, variants of it. And then they have something called phenotypic variability, where the disease looks a little bit different in different populations. They still have the same disease, but, they want to test the drug to see how well it does in each of these areas. And once again, the safety evaluation continues, including potential drug-drug interactions. So they want to know, like, if people are taking, people with diabetes, if they're taking insulin, is there any, dual effect from the insulin in the drug or from high blood pressure medication in the drug? So they study throughout this whole phase, they're always collecting safety information. Once these trials are completed, we get to something called an NDA or BLA submission. NDA stands for a new drug application, and BLA stands for a biologics licensing application. The FDA usually meets with the sponsor before they submit this information. They have something called a pre-NDA or pre-BLA meeting. In this meeting, the FDA and the company, they identify what were the pivotal or the key studies that really showed that this drug works. They talk about how, the statistical analysis, so how are we going to analyze the data? And they uncover any major unresolved issues that the FDA might have with what the company was planning to submit to them. The final NDA submission, it's a big packet of information. It includes all the animal data, the human data, and everything from every phase of development. So any safety information that was collected, any side effects they saw at any point, and then if people did develop side effects, could they give them anything to mitigate those side effects? So sometimes you do get a side effect, but then there's another drug you can take to help take care of that side effect. When the FDA gets all this information, they have anywhere from 6 to 10 months to review it. And the final outcome is that they make a decision. It either gets the go-ahead that this drug can now be sent to pharmacies and prescribed by physicians, or sometimes they completely say that, we are not going to approve this drug, or sometimes they say we need more data, or you need to do another study because we're just not sure. And the FDA takes this responsibility very seriously because they are the last people to make a decision before a drug reaches the market. There's no other stopgap, they are the final word. And once it's out there, there might be thousands of people taking the new drug. So like I said, during this NDA review, the FDA determines that the application's complete. They have a review team that they assign to evaluate it. And I kind of mentioned this, that they look at the effectiveness, they look at the safety data, they want to know that the benefits of the drug outweigh the risks. And they also want to know that the manufacturing methods and the controls used to maintain the product quality are adequate, so that every person that takes this drug is always getting the same amount, the same quality, and that kind of thing. During this NDA review too, sometimes they do involve the patient community, and they have something called an advisory committee, which is a large public meeting where they bring in some experts to talk about the data. And there's always a part of that meeting that includes patients and caregivers, like an open public, microphone time. Once the drug's approved, the FDA overview does not end. There's something called post-market safety surveillance. So after the drug is out there and more people are starting to take it, the FDA knows that a product will always be limited at the time of approval, that you only studied a small group of people, and that the clinical studies were brief in duration and, did not have the larger population. And sometimes new safety information emerges after the product is used by a wider patient population. So the FDA maintains an active program in post-marketing safety surveillance to monitor adverse events that happen after the drug is already approved. So what exactly is FDA's role beyond this? A couple things about the FDA. The FDA themselves do not develop drugs. All of the drug development is done by researchers, pharmaceutical companies, and sometimes nonprofit groups conduct disease research and do their own drug development programs. FDA does not test the drugs in clinical trials. They don't run clinical trials. The FDA staff are not on site for clinical trials. But the researchers that are doing the trials do have to seek FDA approval before beginning. The FDA's role is really to review data, not to conduct it. This is a little bit about the practice of medicine and drug costs. Another thing about the FDA is that they don't have the authority to regulate the practice of medicine. So FDA regulates the development and marketing of medical products, but once it's approved, doctors are free to prescribe any FDA-approved drug for other conditions known as off-label use. So they can prescribe it to someone with the disease in the label, or they can give it to any patient that they want if they think it might have a beneficial effect. And the FDA has no say-so over the practice of medicine and how physicians do that. Another thing is that FDA doesn't regulate the price of medicine. We know that some of these new drugs, especially for rare diseases, can be very expensive, sometimes in the millions of dollars, hundreds of thousands, tens of thousands. And consideration of drug pricing is not part of FDA's mandate. FDA cannot base their approval decision based on what they think the drug price is going to be. And even FDA, they don't receive any pricing information during their review. So as they're going over all that data that we talked about in the NDA and BLA, the FDA does not know how much the company is eventually going to charge for that drug. So it's completely out of the FDA's hands how much the drug's going to cost. FDA's mission does include promoting public health. They do that through several programs that they have and through their website. And the review staff at the FDA, they have expert knowledge on drug development and clinical trials. They provide technical help to researchers and drug developers to try to make a smooth path for drug development. They help companies in their design of clinical trials and studies. And during all those different phases that we looked at just a little bit ago, the FDA has numerous meetings with companies throughout that drug development process to help give them guidance. They don't wait till the very end and say, you didn't do it right. They try to meet with them at every step of the way to try to provide guidance and say, this is what we might accept and this is what we wouldn't. So for more information on FDA regulation of medical products, as well as other ways to get involved, this is a website that you could go to, fda.gov/for-patients/. So now we're going to talk a little bit about this meeting that we're planning and just an introduction to patient-focused drug development. So the purpose of these meetings, the FDA, they realized that there was an important voice missing from the drug development process. And this is the voice of people living with the disease as well as their caregivers. And they wanted to develop a more systematic way to gather the patient perspective about the condition and possible treatment options. This kind of information would help inform their understanding of the context for assessing the benefits versus the risks of new drugs and decision-making in general for new drugs. And patient input really helps the FDA during drug development and their review of an application for marketing a new drug. When I've mentioned this term several times, benefit risk assessment. So for every drug that the FDA reviews, they go through a very formal step-by-step assessment to evaluate, do the benefits of the new drug outweigh the risks? These are the 5 areas that they assess. So they need to analyze the condition. What is this disease? How does the disease progress? What kind of symptoms do people have that have the disease? And what are the current treatment options? So what's currently available for people with this disease? And how well do those current treatments treat some of those most important symptoms? Those 2 things are the things that we're going to help the FDA understand about LGSOC, okay? This next part, the benefits, the risks, and the risk management, this comes from the clinical trial data. So they look at the clinical trial data to see what were the benefits we saw, what were the side effects and risks that we saw in the clinical studies, and if there were side effects, could they be managed? So our meeting is going to be a framework for discussing questions that actually came from the FDA's benefit risk framework that we just went over. And the topics we'll talk about represent important considerations in the FDA's decision-making. So to plan this meeting, we looked at this and other disease area questions and tailored our agenda and the panelist questions to communicate the most important information related to LGSOC that we want to really convey to the FDA. The FDA really has emphasized that active patient involvement and participation is the key to the success of these meetings. So this is part of the reason we're having this webinar today, is to try to get you all excited about participating, telling your friends, other people, in the LGSOC community, anyone that might be able to help us out here and get involved. At the end of the meeting, this is we're going to everybody says, what's the outcome of the meeting? We are going to write up and summarize the entire meeting into a report called the Voice of the Patient Report. This will include a summary of the patient and caregiver and audience testimony that we hear, everybody's stories that we've heard. We are going to do some live polling, telephone polling on the day of the meeting. We'll include that data, as well as any written comments that people, email into us related to the topics. This Voice of the Patient document is a key communication to the FDA review staff, as well as to drug developers and drug companies about what's most important in a treatment for patients and caregivers. And FDA really want this information. It's going to inform them about ways that meaningful new treatments for LGSOC can be developed. So how can you, as an individual, participate in the meeting? Okay, so a little bit about the meeting. Who's this meeting for? It's for LGSOC patients, their caregivers. It's for staff at the FDA. We are sending a broad invitation to as many staff as possible. Sometimes these meetings have 30 or 40 people from the FDA that take their day off to listen to our meeting. That will, invite pharma companies and biotech companies and anyone interested in learning. So I do want to emphasize this is a public meeting. It is open to anyone who has the link to join the meeting. So if you have friends, family, anyone who maybe wants to learn, I think when we were signing on, I think someone actually brought their friend to this webinar, which is awesome. You can do that. If you have coworkers or anyone who doesn't really get it, that doesn't really understand LGSOC, they could come to this meeting and really learn a lot. It's going to take place on October 13th, so just about 6-7 weeks away, from 10 a.m. in the morning till 3 p.m. in the afternoon Eastern time. It's a virtual meeting, so people can participate from anywhere, and I anticipate that we will have folks tuning in from Europe, and maybe who knows where else, from all over the world. And this is the link at the bottom for the interactive live stream. It'll just go to the, if you go to the Star Ovarian Cancer Foundation website, we'll make sure, Nicole's going to make very sure that you guys all get the information on where you can register for the meeting and how to sign in on the day of the meeting. So just to go over what is the agenda on October 13th going to look like? We are going to start out with a welcome and some introductory comments from Star Ovarian Cancer Foundation, as well as a representative from the FDA will give some opening remarks. Then we're going to hear a clinical background given by an LGSOC doctor that's an expert in this area. And then the entire rest of the day will be listening to and learning from all of you. The day is going to be divided into two major topics. The first one, in the morning, we're going to talk about LGSOC symptoms. So what kind of symptoms do people experience, and how do those symptoms affect your lives? How have they affected your life? How do they continue to affect your life? We're also going to talk about, what are some of your hopes for the future, maybe your worries for the future. And in the afternoon, we'll take a break for lunch, a half-hour break. And when we come back in the afternoon, we're going to talk about treatments and how do people manage symptoms, and what are the current ways that they do that, and maybe what do they hope for future approaches to treatment. We want to hear about everything you might be doing to try to help. So that could be medicines, any kind of, whether it's whatever it is that you've been prescribed for this, as well as supplements, if people are using acupuncture, CBD, anything that you are using to try to help with the symptoms of LGSOC. And we want to know how well they work, what things seem to help the most, and how do they help you. We also would like to hear if anybody's participated in a research study, a clinical research trial for LGSOC. And if you haven't, we might want to hear what would go into your decision about, whether or not to participate in a clinical trial. How much would you have to know about the new drug before you said, that I would be willing to participate? The topics will include, we're going to hear several different ways. We're going to have for the morning, and then for the afternoon, we're going to have 5 pre-recorded patients that'll talk about their experience. These people have already been identified and are already working on developing their statements. And then, as I mentioned earlier, we're going to have polling questions. There'll be a telephone number at the top of your screen. The moderator, who is my colleague, James Valentine, he will say, like, I have a question for you. Of all the symptoms of LGSOC, which ones affected your life the most? And then if the phone number will go up and you can call in. You'll be put into a queue, and it's kind of like a talk show. It'll be a little bit like a talk show. And James then might ask you a question back after, it'll become like a bit of a discussion. We also have a way for people to send in written comments. You can do that in advance of the meeting as well as on the day of the meeting. And after this, we'll have a summary of the meeting. What did we hear that day? And some closing remarks. So what are we going to talk about? I'm just going to go over these briefly, some of the discussion questions. So for topic 1, when we're talking about LGSOC symptoms and impacts, of all the symptoms of LGSOC, which 1 to 3 symptoms have had the most significant impact on your or your loved one's life? What is a good day, a best day, a worst day? What are those like for you? And maybe are there specific activities that are important to you that you or your loved one cannot do at all or as fully as you'd like because of living with LGSOC? Also, how have your symptoms changed over time? We'd like to know, what did you first notice? What was the first thing where you knew something wasn't right? And then how did that change over time? We also would like to hear about some of the psychological impacts of this. So how has your ability to cope with the symptoms changed over time? Sometimes people experience depression, anxiety, those kinds of things, and we'd like to hear about that. And then what do you fear the most as you get older? So what worries you the most about your condition, and what frustrates you the most about your condition? Then like I said, we're going to shift gears in the afternoon to talk about current challenges to treating LGSOC. Some of the topics that we'll be covering then are, what are you currently doing to manage your symptoms? How well do those treatments treat the most significant symptoms of LGSOC? And then what are the most significant downsides to your current treatments, and how do they affect your daily life? So, is it burdensome that you have to go somewhere to a hospital to get a treatment, or are there actual side effects you feel in your body? Those kinds of things. And then finally, we'd like to know, short of a complete cure, which of course everybody wants a complete cure for LGSOC, but what specific things would you look for in an ideal new treatment for LGSOC? So the discussion format, as I said, there's going to be this panelist, these 5 panelists for the morning, 5 for the afternoon. The purpose of the panelists is to set a foundation for the broader audience discussion that follows. The panelists were already selected to, reflect a range of experience. We're going to do then some, like the online polling questions that I mentioned. Once again, that polling data we will put into the Voice of the Patient report, but once again, it'll give us some idea of where we're starting off with. And then we're going to move to the live discussion with the audience, where we're going to have some people, about 5 people for the morning and 5 for the afternoon, on a live Zoom panel, which is a huge way that you can participate, is to be on the Zoom panel. If anyone's interested, you can reach out to Nicole to how you could participate. You would either be on the morning Zoom or the afternoon Zoom panel. And once again, you'd be engaging in a live discussion with the moderator. And then, and then, like I said, we're going to ask for call-in as well as write-in. A couple tips for how to participate effectively in the meeting. Please go back to, earlier we talked about what FDA's role is and what it isn't. Think about the purpose of the meeting, that we're trying to educate the FDA to let them know where's the unmet medical need in your community. Where is it that things are working, but where we still, things aren't working, that we need more help. Maybe take a look at these discussion questions in advance. And if you have something important to share, try to relate it to the, most appropriate topic or panel question, and pick up your phone and call in. We'd love to hear from you. And it's okay to reiterate a feeling or experience that somebody already voiced, even if it's similar to your own. But if you do call in, just try to give it a personal spin, or maybe add some component to it that we didn't hear from the other person. Sometimes hearing the same thing from a bunch of people, that's an aha moment. like this is really important. And so the FDA will, be able to grasp that from hearing from many of you. The FDA has told us that they want to hear from as many people with LGSOC as possible, because you get a different perspective from each person. And we're going to paint this picture of what the real life experience is and how, what's similar that people share. And then maybe some of you have had really a unique journey that we want to hear about. Try to keep your comments concise and focused, so that we can hear from as many people as possible. And remember that after the meeting, if you think of something like, oh, I should have said that, you can still write that in and send it in, and we will include that in the Voice of the Patient report. So you can participate. We want you to join the meeting by webcast. You can pre-register now here at this at the STAR website. And like I said, you can still send in comments 30 days after the meeting, and we will include those in the report. So in summary, this really is your opportunity to be individually part of this process, and each of you can have a meaningful impact on clinical trial design and new drug development for LGSOC. So your collective voices really have to be heard, not only at the end when they're reviewing the drug, but at the beginning of the process. So when they're just starting to think about a new treatment for LGSOC. This kind of information is going to help drug companies design trials that better meet your needs, and it's going to help the FDA assess the risks and benefits with a full understanding of the impact of LGSOC and your perspective. So please, please join us and help make a difference on October 13th. So I've just gone through a lot of information, thrown a lot of stuff at you. I'm hoping, does anyone have any question? Anything's a fair question about any part of this? About participating in the meeting, any logistical questions about how things are done?
There is one question in the chat. Michelle wants to know, does the FDA discussion just include drug therapy, or does it also include diagnostic tools and equipment, such as for identifying cancer more clearly for removal during surgery, maybe like highlighting the cancer during surgery, or better diagnostic testing to see if someone has low grade rather than just a CA-125 blood test?
So we are going to invite, the FDA does oversee that, the diagnostic tests in the Center for Devices and Radiologic Health, CDRH, those are the group. We will, that's a really good point. Nicole, we've been meeting regularly with staff at the FDA as we plan this. Nicole, let's remind the FDA that came up at our webinar, and that people would like people from CDRH that are involved in the evaluation of diagnostics that we would like to reach out to them to participate in the meeting as well. That's a really good point. Thank you, Michelle, for that wonderful question. Any other questions or thoughts?
Yeah, I have a quick thought / question about the discussion topics.
Yeah.
So I'm struggling just a little bit, I guess, with the language. So you refer a lot to LGSOC symptoms that are affecting your life, and I assume a lot of us, have gone through treatment and now we're on maintenance therapy.
Okay.
So what's actually affecting me is the maintenance therapy and the side effects of that medication. Like actually LGSOC, I had my surgery, I've gone through all the rigmarole, and now it's just the meds that are having an impact on my life. So when I read over those questions, the symptoms that I had of low grade were actually quite minimal, and I didn't even really know I had it. I'm sure like most of you. So anyway, I was just trying to think through how I would answer these, and the actual symptoms of LGSOC are not really impacting me. It's all medication side effects.
Yeah, that's a good point, Con. So those questions, they're kind of standard that the FDA has for these meetings. Yeah, I think that, maybe, we'll have to talk about that a little bit more, Nicole, about how we think that that's going to unfold, and, what the focus for the morning session will be.
The way that I think that it came up in one of our previous meetings was, Connie, what you got to was, we're still living with it. and you're living with it with, with medicines that are the other medicines, as prescribed, that aren't, weren't originally created, and that are giving us really harsh, side effects. And that's how that it was discussed, is what is it like now? And so I think that maybe it would be smart maybe to have in the discussion, what was it like? But what James had mentioned to us, when we met with the panel, was, it's from diagnosis on, was the focus of what the FDA wants to hear about, is now that you've been diagnosed, getting over surgery, what that was like. And then now, that you're living with medicines that are making probably your bones hurt. Or, some people are on clinical trials of different drug combinations that are causing them really harsh, toxicities. So those type of things. But that's that's just kind of what was said. But I think that makes it really clear that we should be, the wording can be clarified. I think that's a good point, Connie. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks so much. I think that would be super helpful if you've added some examples in there.
Okay. No, that's a really good point. Every disease is not the same. And like you said, and I know for LGSOC, sometimes people are, asymptomatic at that they're right, that they don't, discover, they don't have like a lot of symptoms like some other diseases have. So yeah, we'll think about that more, Connie. Thank you for sharing that thought and concern, and we'll share that with James as well, who couldn't be with us today, just to talk about it a little bit more.
I wanted to give Monica an opportunity. I think I saw you on mute before.
Hi, yes. So I had spoken with Nicole just a couple days ago, and she had shared some information about chemotherapy being required now through the FDA. And I was kind of curious, how did that fall in line? How did the FDA come to that conclusion with is that outside of ours? And I guess that part was confusing to me, is going forward with further treatments. Is chemotherapy now required? And should I talk about that later on?
Can you, I'm not like, I haven't heard that the FDA can require someone to take chemo. They can't require someone to take chemo. Can you clarify?
And Nicole maybe said it different, and maybe I just misunderstood. I was just trying to wrap my head around it. So
Yeah,
Nicole, I'm sorry. I remember we talked the other day.
No, it's okay. So it's part of a, with clinical, trials, kind of, being pre-treated for, chemotherapy, is one of the, to be qualified, for a specific trial. And so that's where it comes in, is that, patients, who weren't pre-treated, hadn't had that line of therapy, weren't qualified. And so that's where it's coming in. And, that our discussion is around the issue of, our type of cancer being, chemo resistant, and studies that have shown, we don't respond to chemo because of the type of growth. And so I don't think this meeting, Monica, I think there are people, that have written in and hopefully will share just that, because they have been in that, case, where their doctor said, you're going to need to go ahead and take chemo now so that you can get on this drug trial. And so maybe, that those individuals will jump in on the treatment part. And that's the other part of, discussing with our medical, experts who are coming to talk. They will bring all of that up. That's something that will be discussed, in our, researcher time. And just so you all know, it's Dr. Gershenson and, Dr. Grisham are both going to, talk. And they both know that this is an issue with, trials right now.
Yeah, and
Just
Monica,
you.
yeah, if that's part, we want one thing to remember is that what the FDA really wants to hear is your personal perspectives. They don't want you speaking on behalf of the LGSOC community. So Monica, if that's part of your journey, that you maybe you were told that you had to do that, and maybe you went ahead, hadn't had chemo just so you could get in the trial, but you weren't comfortable with that. That's part of your story. That is absolutely fair to talk about. That's actually a wonderful thing to talk about. I don't know what's behind FDA's thinking to say that you have to have tried a certain chemo regimen before you can be in this clinical trial to start a new therapy. I don't know. I really don't understand it. But I think for you to talk about your any frustrations, or even if you're, that you didn't understand it, that's all really important stuff for the FDA to hear.
Great, thank you.
Go ahead, Amanda.
Yes, because that was going to be my question too. Like, I didn't know if we were trying to come together as a group collective and speak about similar things. Because like for me, chemo worked for me. So I don't want to say something and then the FDA be like, oh, wait, that's not for, that's different than what other patients are saying with your same subtype of ovarian cancer. So I didn't know if are we watching what we say, or are we just going to be honest? Okay.
Honest, for sure.
Okay.
Yeah.
This is really an opportunity to be honest. Like, for instance, we've had some other diseases where there's like a gene therapy in development, and sometimes gene therapy, there's certain diseases that are progressive, and if you give a gene therapy to a child with the disease, it's got a greater chance that it's going to not develop, the disease won't develop and progress the way it usually does. But the people that are older, that have kids that are teenagers or in their 20s or 30s, they're saying like, what about us? Why are we being excluded from being able to even try it, and things like. So it is really, Amanda, it's honesty about your experience. And if you did take chemo and it was effective, I would share that. But I also want to know I've never had chemotherapy. What were the challenges of getting chemotherapy? Were you afraid that if it was going to work or not? Was it lengthy? Was it, really cut into your life? I don't know. What was that experience like? Sometimes we can be really glib, people at the FDA, they can read a textbook or say, give this chemo, but they don't know the backside. This is about the human story, putting a human understanding that they could never get from a textbook, from reading a textbook. So yeah, all of your honest, open stories are really important.
We had another question in the chat similarly about chemo and clinical testing. And will we be talking about that when we know that chemo is not working? But I know that chemo does work for some patients with low grade. So I think what I'm hearing is just be honest about your personal experience. And that's part of the problem. Part of the problem is that we don't have a treatment that works for everybody. So that's what we want to convey. So I just want to kind of clarify that. We did have, on the topic you were just discussing, we have one more question. Will genomic profiling be brought into the discussions?
So that was from me, that question. So I'm from England. So I think in the US, genomic profiling is a bit more prevalent. In the UK, it's not. I paid for mine to be done in the US because I like to get on board with all the new stuff coming in. But I suppose obviously low grade is a rare cancer, but then we split it down further into the different profile, the mutations. So KRAS, I think, is probably the most commonest. I'm BRAF V600E. So I'd be really interested in drugs being developed specifically for that, because some of the things that work for people with KRAS won't work for me and vice versa. So I suppose it's how much detail we get into in the discussions.
Yeah, thanks for that. And Michelle, thank you for staying awake. It must be. Are you in England?
Yeah, I live near London in England. It's just gone midnight. I've stayed up. It's unusual for me.
You're at camp.
Yeah, you're
lots of caffeine.
But Michelle, you know what? getting into genetics and genetic subtypes is actually an important part of this meeting, because when the FDA, when you think about it, if they're looking at a new treatment, any kind of new chemo or any drug, sometimes it's restricted to certain genetic subtypes. So we'd like to hear, did you qualify, or that my subtype, that there's been no clinical trials for my subtype, that kind of thing. It's also going to be a good message to, anyone from the drug development side. So if you have any industry people, if they say, oh, we didn't know that there's not, or we don't, haven't heard from that community, they might start doing an analysis of what's available, can we move into that direction? So yes, that kind of detail, it's kind of a medical meeting and a personal meeting. So it's everything.
Great. Thank you.
Thank you, Michelle.
Okay.
Anything else, Ellie?
Nope, nothing else.
Okay, well, thank everybody. Please stay on the line. There's a continuation of the meeting. I'm going to drop off and Nicole's going to continue, but it was really my great pleasure to be with you all. I'm sorry we didn't have time to do introductions, but it was a big group. And I hope that we see and hear from as many of you as possible on October 13th. So thank you.
Thank you so much, Larry. We appreciate you.
Okay, take care.
Excellent. Well, that was super informative. And I hope that answered a lot of the wonderings, the questions. We are recording, and I guess I could turn off the recording for now, and we'll continue the rest of our meeting.